How's it going, YouTube? Welcome to the new tutorial series, multiplayer game with Unity and Node.js. Today I'm going to be showing you over the setup for the Unity project as well as Node, and then we're going to start developing a connection between the two. I'm going to show you all your links are going to be down below in the description, and I'm going to show you everything with Node in terms of getting it set up, checking the version, setting up a project, and all that jazz. So stay tuned in just a second. All right, so the first thing you're going to do is you're going to navigate over to the Node.js website. The link will be down below in the description. And you're going to download the LTS version. So I believe the one I'm working on is 8.11, but 8.12 should be fine. You should be able to grab that and just install that there and run. The second item, if you don't already have it, you're going to need, I'm going to be using Visual Studio Code. This is, you don't have to, but a lot of my stuff is going to be through Visual Studio Code, so it might be a little bit easier to download. In terms of working with Node and stuff, it would be a lot easier. So just go there, download for Windows, and grab the stable version there. And the last thing is Unity. So if you don't have Unity, I'm using the Unity Hub. We'll just let her load up for a second. I'm using the Unity Hub and version 2018.2.3 F1. The package we're going to be using in Unity, I believe, is set for 2017, so anything above 2017 and up should be okay in terms of working with this project. So after you guys have that all downloaded, you should be able to open up a new Visual Studio window. I have the little icon down here, and we're just going to have a new folder that we're going to work out of. So we're just navigating to where you guys want to keep your project, and then we're going to have a new folder. For the project. So we're just going to call this one server underscore tutorial. You guys can just call it server. This is just one that I was setting up beforehand. So we're just going to select that folder, and that again was file open folder. And what that'll do is that'll set our project folder for this Visual Studio Code window. And we'll get a nice little welcome screen. We get this blank folder. That's just because we don't have anything in the folder itself. So one of the first things we're going to do is we're going to bring up the internal terminal here. That can be done holding down Control and then the tilde button that's beside the 1 normally. I believe you can do View, and then go down to Integrated Terminal as well if you'd rather just go through the top menu. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to check the Node version. So you're going to type down here. So this just works just like the console. You're going to type in node-v. And as you can see, I'm on 8.1, and if you just download it now to follow along, you're going to be on 8.12. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to set up the base project in the server. So to do that, we're going to do node, or sorry, we're going to do, well, that was loud. We're going to do npm init for initialize. And the npm is the node package manager, and you're going to see that keyword get used a lot in terms of installing different resources that we need. So we're going to let that run, and it's going to give you some jargon down here, and then it's going to start asking you a couple questions, and this is just to set up the project file. We're not going to fill them all out, but we're going to fill a majority of them out. So the first one is the package name. We're just going to call this server or game server. So it's up to you. Oh, so you can't have capitals. I think I did this last time when I was setting it up. Version 1.0, sure. You can fill out a description if you want. Entry point, so we're going to leave the index.js. You can call it whatever you want. I think in my actual project I call it server.js, but we're going to leave it as index.js for the tutorial here. And we're just going to kind of go through the next ones. And you can fill out author if you want. Fill out this. Don't worry about the licensing, and then it's going to give you a preview of the JSON. This is all editable, by the way. This will create a package.json for you. We'll just hit enter, and there you go. So the first file that we get in our folder is called package.json, And this is needed, especially when we go to uploading our build. You're going to need this package.json. It basically just tells what's all in this node development area. So the next thing we're going to run is we're going to use a resource called nodemon. And what nodemon does is instead of setting up the project and hitting run and then closing and hitting run, which gets very tedious, especially with a real time, nodemon will detect any changes, so saves in your file. So if you just do Control S, and it will restart for you. So in terms of a game server, it's gonna be really handy. So we're gonna do the npm install nodemon, and then you'll hit enter, and you'll let this do its thing for a little bit. I think it's the largest one it downloads. So there you go. So if you had, it's going to install a couple things. You're going to get node modules. You're going to get a package.lock.json file, and you'll notice that our package.json got updated with a dependency tab. So everything you download will get added to the dependencies now, and basically it just says we're using this version of nodemon. So when we go to upload it to our dedicated hoster, then it will know to make sure you grab all those packages for us. The next thing we're going to be using is socket.io. So we're going to go to npm install socket.io. Make sure you remember the period there. We'll let that go for a second. So in our first tutorial, we're going to install, the next thing we're going to install is short ID. Now we won't be using it in this tutorial. We're going to be using it in the next video. For containing IDs to players and objects inside the game. But just because we're installing everything right now, we'll just make sure that we have it there. So we're going to do npm install and then short ID. And while that's going, if you ever want to know where all these packages are, you can go to npm js.com, I believe. Yeah, so this is the package manager. You can search for packages. So we could say like short ID, and it will come up here and it will tell you, see there's a couple of them. It'll tell you the latest version, it'll tell you how to install it, it'll tell you how to use it. So if you ever are going beyond this tutorial and you're looking for a library to use, npmjs.com is where it's pulling everything from when you do npm install. Okay, so the next thing that we need to do, so those are all the dependencies we're going to use right now. We might add some in future tutorials, but for right now we just need those. So now we need that index.js file. So if you just click the new file here, we're going to type in index.js, and we're going to get a nice blank file. So what this is when we, in our package.json, we specified, well, we left it blank. So we specified that the main, so the entry point of our application is going to be index.js. And we're going to start, we're going to leave Node here, and we're going to start working with Unity now. So I'm using Unity Hub. If you guys want to download just 2018.2.3 F1, that's your choice. Like I said, it should work with 2017 and up. You shouldn't have too much of an issue. But I'm going to go ahead and make a new project. And if you just type in Unity Hub as well, download, you should be able to get it. I think it's part of Unity now that's gone 1.0. So we'll just we're going to change this to 2D. So for this tutorial, we're going to do a 2D shooter, like a multiplayer shooter. I think a lot of people will enjoy that. It applies similar concepts to what I teach on stream and what I'm doing on stream. So we're going to call this Unity Node tutorial underscore shooter. Shotter underscore shotter. Alright, so Unity Node underscore tutorial, and we're just going to create the project, and we'll let Unity do its thing. Alrighty, so after your project has finished setting up, it does take a couple minutes, so that's why I stopped the video. We're going to navigate to the asset store. And in the top here, we're going to do socket.io. So there's a couple socket packages. We're going to be using just one in particular that I have experience with, but I imagine a bunch of these probably would work. And it's free, so don't worry about it. It's free. So you're gonna find this one. It has like the cool green. It's done by Fabio Pinteri, and yeah, so it requires 4 or higher. So like I said, 2017 up, you shouldn't have no problem. Okay, so you're gonna download if you haven't already done it. I'm just gonna hit import, and if you're holding down Alt, you can close the tree, which I did here. And we're just gonna install everything. Sometimes you'll get a package that'll have a bunch of demo scenes and you don't actually need them and they just take up space. So we're gonna just install this guy really quick. And while it's doing that, you should get your socket.io package here. So I'm gonna go ahead and create a couple folders. These are just folder structures I use. And they're totally up to you how you structure stuff. So we're just gonna have code, and I'm gonna do another folder inside code called networking. And so we're gonna be creating a couple classes. So the first thing we're gonna do is I'm gonna rename sample scene to tutorial. So I just did that using F2 for renaming purposes. We'll go into the camera. The camera's on orthographic because I set it to 2D, and that's fine. And we're gonna create an object. We'll just call this code networking. So I like to use the square brackets just to note that there's gonna be something underneath it, or it's like more like a folder structure. That's up to you. You can just call it code. You can call it everything. You can call it whatever you want. Basically, it's just an empty game object. And the first thing we're gonna do is we're gonna create. Oh, where's my stuff? Okay, there we go. You guys might not have these options, by the way. You might only have C# script. These are custom, just ones I set up with the namespace. All right, so I'm gonna create a new script. I'm gonna call it network client. And we're just gonna go ahead and open that. So the main package that's getting used from socket.io, there's a component called socket.io component, and that's what handles all the messages and connecting to our node server or to any socket.io's connection. What we're going to be doing is we're going to be overriding that component so we can use everything that's inside of it, but keep it nice and neat. So we don't need to create another script that contains it and you have to have a reference to it. No, we just have our one script that it works with. So I like working with namespaces. So basically I treat project as the code folder, and then I go down from there. So we had a networking, and then I put in network client into there. This is up to you. If you choose to use namespaces, it's how you want to work. So we do need an import, and that's going to be the socket.io. And that's what namespace socket.io component is in. And if I type this guy, and it'd be handy if I could spell socket.io. And we're just gonna, I'm gonna hit F12. F12 will bring it up in this console here, and I'm just gonna do this little keep open tab. I'm working in Visual Studio, by the way, for this, not Visual Studio Code. If you're working in Visual Studio Code for this whole thing, just have another window like the server and open up the project code, and then just go find the socket.io component. So we're going to do a little bit of modifying to this to get it to work nicely for what we want to do. So the first thing we need is we need to find, I believe, one second. Okay, so we're going to structure this a little nicer. We're going to give this a header. So if you've never used attributes before, this basically is more These are different things that apply to the variable that's below it, or the property that's below it. And they come in handy for structuring things. So I'm just going to call this socket IO component. So what this will do is when we have stuff inside network client, it will keep it nice and structured in our Unity inspector. And what do we got here? Okay, so we need to do two more things. So the first one is we're going to go into the Unity interface, and we're going to put the keyword virtual in front of start. So the reason why we're doing this is because this allows us in network client, so you'll see the little squiggly here, it allows us to override the start function, but then we can also call the base, because there's no point in rewriting this code if it already exists. And we're gonna do the same thing with update. So we're gonna add virtual keyword to start an update. I didn't do it to awake. If you do need awake, just do the same thing. And we're gonna hit save. So Control S to save there. And you'll notice we still have the squiggly marks, and to fix that, we should just hit override. And we'll do that for the update. And we're good to go. So when we override the start function, it means we're no longer calling this one. And I mean, there's a lot of stuff that happens in update. So the first thing we're gonna do is we're gonna use the base keyword, and then we're gonna hit base start. And if you just do it at the start of your function before you start doing anything else, then you're all good to go. You shouldn't run into any issues. But if you were to start adding like code up here or something, you could potentially run into issues. So just make sure you do base start, and then we'll add code below, and you should be good to go. Okay, so we're gonna save that. We're gonna go back to Unity. We're gonna click on this object. Just wait for it to compile down here, down the bottom right. And now that it's done that, we can do network client. So these are default variables that we got, and this URL is fine. What it's saying is we're going to connect to localhost, and we're going to connect to this port. Now for this tutorial, we are going to change the port that we are connected on. We're actually going to use the port 52,300. It's just a random number that I picked. So if you just double click on that, normally it only keeps going, and unless it has an underscore, it'll grab that chunk of code. So you should just be able to double click on the number and then type in 52,300. We can leave the rest by default. That's up to you to change in the future. And we should be good. So we have a couple things. So we have a Unity project that has a socket IO connection. We made a class called network client. It doesn't really do too much right now, besides just kind of go over top of socket IO. And we have our server with an index.js. So the first thing we're going to start doing is we're going to start creating on our server, we're going to start being able to handle connections. So now that we've done the setup, let's start doing connection, getting stuff connected, and then our next series we'll start chatting. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to bring in socket IO. So just like Unity, how we brought in socket IO, we're going to bring in socket IO in Node. So when you bring stuff in through Node, you typically store it in a var or a variable, like a variable, and you use the keyword require. And then require bases it off where it is in the project. So we're going to do socket.io, and we're going to pass in some parameters to socket.io. And the first thing we're going to pass it in is process.environment.port, all capitals. And then we're going to use the or sign, and we're going to type in our 52,300. So what this is saying is we're going to pass in the port, like the process environment's port. So typically when you host this to a web server, that's going to be port 80. And if we don't have this defined, it's going to do 52,300. So that means when we're working locally, we'll use 127.0.0.1 for localhost, and we're going to set it to the port 52,300. When we use online, we'll have a different address, either IP or through like a domain name, and it'll be :80. And you'll notice that in future tutorials when we do that, go back and forth. Okay, so we now have the library stored in IO, and we've set it to the port that we want. let's just do a nice console.log. So if you're familiar with Unity, console log is just like your debug.log. And you'll notice that I'm using single quotes. So Node.js typically, while you can use double quotes, they typically use single quotes because when you start working with JSON objects, you're going to need those double quotes later. So it makes it just a little bit easier if you get in the habit of doing single quotes. You'll also notice that I tend to put semicolons. Now, you don't really need semicolons. I'm going to put them in just because I'm used to C# and that, and so that's up to you if you want to put them in. But if you do start running into issues, just start putting in the semicolons, but they're not necessarily needed. Okay, so server has started. So now if you don't have this terminal or it's stuck on output, you can switch to terminal here, or like I said, control tilde or view integrated terminal. So to start the project, we're going to go to nodemon, and then we're going to say index.js. And you'll see here, now that we have server started, it's going to say, what do we got here? Starting node index.js, cleanup, waiting for changes before restart. We're going to go like this, and we get a nice little error. This is beautiful. And let's see where we messed up already. Do I have something running? Oh, you know what? I have my main process running. I'm sorry. Okay. There we go. Okay, so I actually had my demo app running on the same port, and I was getting an error saying that, hey, we basically can't use that port. You guys probably wouldn't ever have that error, so you guys should see server started. So what it did was it set up the I/O, then it ran this piece of code to say the server started. Last thing we're going to do, just really quickly, is we're going to set up I/O to handle an on connection. So the way socket I/O works, think of it like sockets with an added ability to have events. So everything, either you're sending an event or you're taking an event, they all have names, and they're all typically done through strings. So we're going to say it's a connection event. The connection event, you're going to see a couple. There's like connection and disconnect. They're like part of the I/O library. The rest you can name yourself, but you'll notice that we use specific names for certain ones. So this function requires the event name and then a listener, which is just a typical function. So we're going to say function, and this returns to you a socket. And if you're familiar with any type of programming, networking wise, you mostly deal with sockets. So I don't know why I did this. Basically, you should have the name of the event, function, and then we use curly braces. Basically, we're sticking a function inside this function call. And all we're going to do is we're going to do a console log, and we're going to say connection made, and maybe an exclamation point. So if we hit Control S, you'll notice nodemon just picked it up, and you'll notice that it still says server has started. And we haven't got connection made because nothing's connected to it. So let's go back to Unity, and we'll open up network client here. And the first thing we're going to do is try to connect. So if we start this guy right now, socket I/O will try and make a connection to the server. So we're going to start this up. We don't get any debug logs, so we haven't done anything that far. But if you go to here, you're going to see a connection has been made. Okay, so we're going to stop that. So the goal here now is to have the server kind of relay that information back to the client. And we do this very similar to how we've done it on the server side. So we're going to have a function called setup, events. I had to think about what I wanted to call it for a minute. And you'll notice my syntax is a little bit different than most people's programming. It's your choice if you want to follow along and have it capitalized everywhere in the function. It's your choice. But for privates, I typically have a lowercase and uppercase for the public. But the way I was taught in schooling is functions always have uppercase, but it's, like I said, it's up to you. So we're gonna have a setup event, and you'll notice that I call it after the base and on the start. And because we're overriding the socket.io, socket.io has the on function. So if you notice, this looks identical to this guy. And it works basically the same. So we have a string event, and then it has a callback. So the first thing we can do is we can have, so they name it a little different. This one's called open, and this has to do with when you have a connection made. So there's a couple things with the library that will have a different name, but it's okay. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to do an inline function just to kind of follow what we're doing with nodes. So, and C# doesn't like the single quotes. So what I'm doing is I'm passing in a function call. Now you can make this a function call down here by yourself. That's up to you. I'm just going to have it where I put it as an inline function, and it returns to me a socket.io event that I'm going to call E. Okay, and we're going to do a debug.log, and we're going to say connection made to the server. Cool. So now if we run it, you're gonna get double. Okay, this is a bug to do with the socket.io component. It's not gonna hurt you in anything. You only get one connection to the server, so don't worry about it being duplicated. This is just like an output bug where the open happens twice. So my rule of thumb to get around this is I didn't really do any logic in here past saying that a connection was made, and then I was fine. And that's how we're going to follow with the tutorial as well. So we have a connection made, and if I go back to here, it's just going to say 2 connections made. We don't have an event for disconnection yet, so that's why it doesn't say disconnected, and we can do that. So I still have this running. It's your choice if you want to close it, but the cool thing about NodeMon is you can leave it running, and then we can add in other events. So I'm going to go back to here, and we're going to do an event for when they disconnect. So we have connection, and then we have a disconnect. So the connection holds all the functionality for the socket because it returns us the socket. So every event we're going to do from now on is basically inside this function. So we're going to do socket.on. So this looks very familiar to io.on and everything. It's the same call. And we're going to say disconnect. And this is another one of those like keyword ones that you need to have. You can't call it something different. And we're going to say that when you disconnect, we're going to shoot a message, just like a console log message. And in the future, we'll be able to handle players disconnecting and handling them accordingly from the server. But for now, we're just going to say player has disconnected. And we'll start that. And a connection's made, and that's because we had this running, and it has an auto connect feature. So we're going to stop that. We're going to go back to the server, and you'll see a player is disconnected. So right now we have IO brought in on Node.js. We have a connection event and a disconnection event, and the only thing we're missing is a disconnection event here. And in order to do that, we have to do an emit. So when you disconnect from this client, you're typically stopping the game. You don't really need to know that information, and that'll be something later on that we handle in another tutorial, as well as chat. So let's see here. So we'll just kind of recap. So we made a Unity project. We brought in the Socket.io package, and we made a network client that kind of inherits from it and then does its own functionality. We installed Node, installed a couple modules, Node mod, short ID, and Socket.io. You'll notice we haven't used short ID. We're going to use it in the next tutorial. We brought in Socket.io and stored it as a variable, and we started our server. And then we started looking for connections using the variable from the package. We then determine when a connection is made, and this will happen if you connect multiple people. So every time you connect somebody, it'll say connection made, and then it'll give you that's a new socket. So the way you treat this is like this is the person connecting, and then like there's multiple people connecting, and then you have a disconnect. So while this is very simple, this is the basic foundation that we need in order to continue. So the next tutorial that we're going to be going on will be about player objects, so storing players inside this database, as well as using short ID to give them IDs, handling proper removal from the player objects, as well as telling other players that they've been removed, and adding things such as telling other players that you've been added to the game, or an existing player saying new guy's been added to the game, and relaying that information. And then we'll get into some chatting. And once we have the chatting, then we'll have our basis for our multiplayer, which then will begin movement. And we'll have more stuff moving around the screen, and it'll be that fun. So thank you for checking out this YouTube video, number 1 on the series. And be sure to check out number 2 when it comes out later on, probably next week. All right, thanks guys. Thanks for checking it out. As always, have a good one.